Rasha, do you want to start recording then?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Michael Plater-Finley. I'm the chair of Emerge. I've just come in taking over from Ian Finley. And I'm really pleased to be here tonight virtually with you. So this is kind of exciting. This is first of our series of webinars that we're to help us all fight climate change. So I'm very fortunate that Evan and Rasha have put together a script for me. So if I screw up, I'm going to blame them. So we hope that you'll find tonight's session is helpful as you're navigating the changes we're seeing thanks to COVID-19 and everything that we're doing right now in attempting to address climate change, which feels like it's taking a bit of a backseat these days. So I'll be moderating this webinar with the help from Rasha and Evan. And I'd really like to encourage you to participate in the conversation as we're going along. So there's the chat that's available to everyone, and please feel free to send messages in there, including whatever questions you might have. Both Steph and Rachel are super people, and I think they'd be really welcoming of any questions relating to what we're talking about this evening. So please feel free to contribute as we're going along. I'll try to keep things moving, and if there's anything that anyone wants to bring forward, please just use that chat. So I'd like to start the evening with our land acknowledgement. So as we're gathering virtually this evening, we're reminded that Guelph and all of Canada, including Canmore, Alberta, is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a community, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. Today, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples on whose traditional territory Guelph is situated in. So our topic this evening, anxiety, climate, and COVID-19. Many people have experienced anxiety around the lack of real success in the fight against climate change. And COVID-19 is certainly adding to this stress. In fact, the worldwide reaction to the pandemic has only underscored the need for similar widespread international action on climate change at the same scale. That realization can cause us even more anxiety. So these stressors can be as broad as being completely debilitating to as minor as a mere distraction, but they can all prevent us from getting the work done. So how can we learn strategies related to better mental health that can help keep us focused on the job at hand? With us today, we have a longtime environmental activist and author, Steph Legault, of Taking a Break from Saving the World, and Rachel Mahrer, mental health counselor. So as I mentioned, we'll be focusing on anxiety, climate change, and COVID-19. But first, I'd like to put some context around how Emerge sees this fitting in with our work to fight climate change. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Evan Ferrari, our executive director. Evan.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for joining us. Quite a number of you have seen just this brief introduction to Emerge, but for those of you that haven't seen it, and there is a bit of a twist that we've got this time around with some news, a small new piece. This is going to be very brief, but as most of you know, our mandate is to fight climate change through our home tune-up program and our work to get the city to commit to 100% renewable. And this is the first of a number of webinars that we have in the works. We've got 2 more in the works right now that we're just trying to nail to the wall, and we'll be letting you know about those in the very near future. Should also let you know that we've just done another analysis of the Ontario power production that we've seen change radically since COVID-19 and since we've all been living at home a lot more. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to see that analysis, and it's maybe a bit tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, it's very interesting and informing about how our lives are changing. And from our perspective, one of the things that we fully expect, and we don't mean to scare you, but as a result of all of this spending more time at home, we fully expect that our utility bills are going to go up because we're probably spending more money on heating, our electricity, and also our water consumption. There's one of the stats there, and I won't bore you with it, but just to give you a sense of it. We're very proud to have been instrumental in getting the city to commit to 100% renewable energy. And as most of you know, the city has two specific targets around climate change. One is the 100% renewable. It's only for the corporation of the city of Guelph. It's not for the broader community. It's just for the city of Guelph. Then there's a citywide goal that the city of Guelph has also committed to, and that's that we are net zero carbon by 2050. But we're going to be really aggressive here and say, you know what? 2050 is way too late. Given the crisis that we're going through right now, it puts such a fine point on climate change that we know that 2050 is way too late. And frankly, the net zero carbon is not good enough either. And instead, what we're proposing is that the city needs to get a lot more aggressive, make it a 100% renewable energy target to be met by 2035 and not by 2050. But in the process of getting there, we always like to remind people that there are two things that we really want you to remember when we're thinking about renewable energy and getting to 100% renewable energy. This is not about sticking wind turbines and solar panels onto an SUV. That's not it at all. And it's not it at all for a very important piece, and that is that 2/3 of all of the energy that we use in this country we waste, regardless of what the source is. 2/3 of that. So imagine if we were to tackle that first, how much easier it would be to get to that 100% renewable energy. And in order to get there, we've got a pretty straightforward process that is being used by communities around the world. That's about conservation and efficiency first. Building a local distribution system, that's the wires that get power to us and take it away from us. Seizing opportunities that present itself with new technologies, about full cost accounting, paying the true price of these things, electrifying our energy system, not only cars, but also our heating systems, and finally a massive switch to renewables. That's why we want the city to rethink their goal of net zero carbon by 2050 and 100% renewable energy just for the corporation of the city by 2050, and that we need to start pushing for 100% renewable energy by 2035. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Evan. So I'd like to move on to introduce our speaker. So Stefan Legault is joining us from the town of Canmore, Alberta, and he'll be sharing a conservation activist's journey from burnout to balance. As a professional conservation and political activist, he'll examine the consequences of overwork in the Save the World movement. So I think Steph's probably best to do his intro from here. So Steph, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate that, Michael, and thanks to Rasha and Evan and Rachel for having me. It's a great pleasure. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. If it's okay with you guys, I'll share my screen now.
Yes, yeah, sure.
And we'll get things going here. I don't want to belabor the introduction. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a moment. Mostly, what I want to do is chat with you about my most recent book, which is called "Taking a Break from Saving the World." And I've never done this before with a book. This is my 15th book, and I've never had to caution the reader before, but I feel it's important for this particular book. Everything in this book and everything in this presentation could very well be wrong. I'm offering it with the very best of intent, but it's my own personal opinion. Unlike Rachel, I'm not a professional psychologist or counselor. I'm just a dude that's been working in conservation pretty much my entire life, and have learned a few things about how to navigate my way through the particularly challenging world of saving the world, and I'd like to share that with you. So there, you've been warned. The other thing I want to do is provide my own land acknowledgement. Today I'm sitting in the traditional territory of Treaty 7 nations, including the Stoney Nakoda Nation, the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina Nation, as well as the traditional lands of the Ktunaxa people and the lands of the Métis people from Region 3 here in Alberta. And while I could certainly spell the names of the variety of First Nations in your neck of the woods, there's no way I can pronounce them. But I do wish to acknowledge and thank you all for the privilege of having the opportunity to visit you, even if it is just digitally. To burn out, you have to have once been on fire, and I think that this is something that all of us working in the conservation world, or really anybody who's working to make the world a better place, can relate to. And what we're going to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll give you a quick little bit about me and what qualifies me to talk about this. Give you a quick sense of why I wrote the book. I want to talk very briefly then about the culture of burnout in the Save the World movement. We'll put it into the context of our talk tonight around climate and COVID, and just the crazy level of uncertainty that comes along with these two extraordinary global challenges. And then I want to give you 4 lessons in 14 minutes from the book. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with questions and discussion, and Rachel and I will have a conversation. So first, a little bit about me. I was raised in Northern Ontario, hunting and fishing and camping, and wearing outrageously awesome clothes. I started my first conservation organization in 1988. I went to M.M. Robinson High School in Burlington, Ontario, and started a recycling club there. It was incredibly controversial, and I'm not saying that tongue-in-cheek. It actually was very controversial to start a recycling club in 1988. I went on to work for a variety, or volunteer for a variety of conservation organizations until the late 1990s, when I got a full-time job as the founder and executive director of wildcanada.net. And it was somewhere around that time that I met Evan. I had lots of hair then. His hair was less silver at the time. I was also one of the founders and a board member of an organization called the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. And I worked for them for 7 years until 2017. Written a bunch of books, including 3 books of photography. And today I'm the co-principal with my wife, Jen, of High Watermark Strategy and Communications. And I am also a volunteer political organizer here in Alberta, as well as federally. I want to point out that in this awesome picture of my sister and I taken near Wawa, Ontario, I've got my very first camera. It's what my grandparents called the Kodak. They gave it to me when I was quite young. And to this day, I am still lugging around a camera. It's changed a little bit in that time. But my lifelong passion for nature really stems from what I've been able to see through the viewfinder of a camera over all these years. My very first book was called Carry Tiger to Mountain, and I want to just put this into context because it was published in 2006, and the subtitle of the book was The Tao of Activism and Leadership. It essentially tried to help people see what Taoists call the watercourse way of achieving success, and so essentially to view challenges as something not necessarily to be bashed up against, but to go around, go over, go under, or to wear away at. There were chapters in that book on burnout and overwork, and that really helped set the stage so many years ago now for my writing of Taking a Break from Saving the World. But most importantly, I really wish that I had paid better attention to myself. I really should have gone back and reread the chapters on burnout and overwork, because ironically, or maybe not so much, most of the challenges that I have faced in the lead up to writing Taking a Break from Saving the World were really repeats of previous episodes of burnout and overwork and stress related to the incredible burden that we carry as activists trying to make the world a better place. So why I wrote this book in the first place, as I mentioned, I've been an activist for more than 30 years now. I've been working in the conservation community professionally in Canada and in the United States since the mid-1990s. And I guess it was July of 2018, actually, I was fired from, I call it my dream job, which was as program director at Yellowstone to Yukon. Now, the reasons are very complex, but what it really boils down to was that the organization's leadership, the president and the board and I, had a very different perspective on how the world changes and the pathway to create change in the world. We also had a very different perspective on the political dynamic in Alberta. And as a result, that led me to be dismissed from Y to Y. Now, at that time, I was just starting to work on my third book of photography. And so this was a project that was set in Waterton Lakes National Park in the adjacent Castle Wildland. It was focusing, interestingly enough, because our topic is burnout, on the fire that burnt across Waterton Lakes National Park in September of 2017. So a lot of this particular book, Taking a Break, was written while I was traveling back and forth between my home in Canmore, Alberta, and then 4 hours south to Waterton Lakes National Park. It was an incredibly challenging time, and my sense of purpose and self-worth were really challenged during that. As I said, I've been doing activism all of my life, and to suddenly find myself on the outside looking in was extremely difficult. I also had a lot of free time on my hands in those days, and I didn't really realize until after I'd been dismissed how close to burnout I was once again. During that time of spending days and nights in Waterton, I quickly developed the theme of this book, which was to eddy out. Because this book was conceived sitting on the banks of the Belly River, which we're seeing here in Waterton, watching the water curl into peaceful eddies and backwaters. As somebody who's enjoyed paddling most of my life, and I know Evan's a paddle, I'm sure many of you are, I decided to use that theme to explore how we might take a break from our efforts to make the world a better place, to pause, to take stock of our world and the rapids downstream, of which there are many, and then to figure out how to relaunch into those difficult waters. See, burnout was nothing new to me. I'd been through this before. I'd even actually been dismissed from jobs before, including my job with Parks Canada, but I guess I'm really not the easiest person to work with. I knew that the impacts that burnout could have on my own personal health and the well-being of those around me. And I knew that the cost of burnout and the cost that can take on our organizations around things like lost productivity, staff turnover, and institutional memory were really serious. I wanted to take a look at the burnout culture that we have in the Saving the World movement. Many of you are volunteers. Some of you are employed in this field. You know that our work, whether it be as a volunteer or as a staff person, is not just a job. It's not just a volunteer gig. It's a calling. It's a life cause. And more these days, as the challenges mount and the pressure mounts, we're expected to do more and more with less and less. Part of the thing that leads us to these extraordinary challenges is a dual issue around a failure of leadership in our organizations to we've succeeded. In fact, we've burned ourselves to a crisp. Compounding that to this virus. And then on top of that, we're expected to use this time to write a novel or sew face masks or bake bread. And somehow that's just part of what is expected of us right now while we're all going through this period of isolation. So let's take a look at some of the things that we can do then, given all of this stress and these strains on us from these myriad factors, to both recognize and avoid the signs of burnout and overwork, and then make sure that we take care of ourselves if we do start to see those signs. So following that same metaphor of eddying out, the first one will be how to stay in our boat. The second one will be how to recognize the signs of burnout and when to eddy out. The third one will be, okay, so we've eddied, now we're in a nice quiet backwater and eddy. How do we read the river to know how to get back on course? And then finally, when we're ready, how do we in fact set our boat back on a path that is sustainable for us? So first, how do we stay in our boat? How do we make sure that as we are volunteering for these organizations that we feel passionately about and for the causes that are so deeply felt, that we do so in a way that's sustainable? Martyring ourselves for our cause does nobody any good. It doesn't do us any good. It can destroy our health, our physical health, our mental health. It can have very serious ramifications. The incidence of severe mental health challenge and suicide in the not-for-profit world, while it has never been quantifiably studied, to the best of my knowledge, qualitatively there are dozens and dozens and dozens of articles in the popular media and academic journals that correlate these issues with suicide and mental health fatigue. And second, if you're a martyr, you cannot continue your cause. By definition, you're no longer with us in order to continue to do good work. And so for these reasons, it's really important to figure these things out. So how to stay in your boat. So these are 8 things that I sort of made a list of for myself that I choose to do as best as I can, and thank God my wife is around to help me remember to do these things. And I offer it as a starting point for your own list. So exercise for me is critical. If I don't exercise every day, even if it's a nice long walk or run or go to the gym, play basketball with one of my kids, those are really important things. The other side of that, the flip side of that coin, is meditation. I've had a meditation practice now for about 15 years, and critical for my own mental health and well-being. And in the book, I go into a little bit about my mental health regimen and how meditation works with that, and even just provide some very simple guidance on meditation. Many of us are in this job because we love the outside, we love nature, we love wild places, and so getting out into it is really important. As volunteers and as staff, we're always looking for opportunities to learn and grow, and these are things that can feed both our mental and physical well-being. A healthy diet, turns out, is really important. I'm not really fond of this one. I'd rather eat crap and drink beer, but my wife tells me this is important, so I do my best, and apparently it seems to help. Getting enough sleep. And again, this is one of those things that if you're on a spiral where you're feeling stress and anxiety, sleep is one of the very first things to suffer. Now, this one's a little bit ironic. Vacations away from work, with no email or phone calls, preferably with my wife and kids. Right now we're being told that we can't do that, so we got to scratch that one off the list, at least for the time being, and maybe replace it with staycations, even if it means hiding from your partner and the kids for a couple of hours, just to get a little bit of peace and quiet. And then finally, in order to pull all of these together, it's the willingness to take responsibility for the things that keep us healthy. It's too easy to blame others for the reasons that we are not able to take care of ourselves. It's easy to say, oh, well, I'm being asked to do so much. That Evan guy, he's such a tough boss, or boy, oh boy, I'm expected to do so much volunteering for this organization. The fundamental truth is that each of us is responsible for our own well-being, and we have to take responsibility for what keeps us healthy. That said, in order to stay in the boat requires teamwork. And so there's a couple things that, that you can do. One of the things that I've been doing for years and years and years now is co-coaching with somebody. So I have a couple of friends who are really insightful and kind and know me way too well. And we co-coach each other. So we'll have a phone call every month or two, and we'll spend half an hour. I'll have a half an hour where I'm asking my colleague questions about his mental health and whether or not he's taking care of himself, and then he does the same. It's important in a work setting to do this with somebody who's not your supervisor. Create a personal board of directors. I borrow this from the book Good to Great, because in that book Jim Collins talks about creating a personal board of directors. These are people who you get on the phone with maybe once every 2 or 3 months to just basically talk about your life's goals and how you're making out, and brainstorm how to overcome challenges. Probably the most practical one, however, is to make an agreement with your supervisor or with a volunteer coordinator at your organization, where you'll simply review your personal sustainability goals from time to time. You have a check-in. And as volunteers, that's really important. If you're being asked to do a lot, take the time to check in and say, look, this is working for me. This is perfectly with my capabilities, or maybe not so much. And make sure that you can do that in a way, in particular, if you're on staff, where you do this without concern for retribution or judgment. So the second lesson is that when the water starts to get rough, or you need to scout, that's the time to eddy out. So what does it mean? What does it mean to eddy out? It simply means to take a break. So those of you who have spent some time on moving water know that when you cut an eddy fence or an eddy line, it means that you find a quiet place along the river where you can nose your boat into a quiet backwater and rest a little bit. The water there is oftentimes moving in the opposite direction of the current, and it gives you a moment to look downriver, to navigate, to scout, and think about how you want to continue. In the context of our work, it's important to understand, to know when is it time to eddy out. So, for me, the most important one is if I get up in the morning and I feel a sense of dread about going to work, or if my work or volunteering no longer feels as though it's giving me energy, if when I contemplate my future, I wish I was doing something else, these are all pretty good signs that you need to take a break. And that could simply mean making sure that you've got a weekend without a computer or a cell phone. It could mean that it's time to take that vacation that is long overdue, or maybe a little bit longer of a break. One of the things that I've noticed is that when I get to this point in my work or in my volunteer efforts where I'm starting to feel that sense of dread, I start to get into this spiral. So we're starting to experience stress. And what happens for me is that if I'm feeling stressed or overworked, I stop doing the things that will alleviate that stress. So the first thing that happens to me is, oh, I can't justify going to the gym today. I'm just too busy. I've got all these emails and people are phoning, and I've got all these demands. And then when I stop exercising, I start to lack energy. And when I start lacking energy, my body starts craving carbohydrates, and I make poor food choices. And then when I start craving carbohydrates and making food choices, my health starts to decline. I still feel sluggish. I get bad sleep. And then last but not least, we become more depressed because we're not sleeping and we're eating poorly, we're not exercising, and we get anxious. And that brings us right back around to the top again, where we start feeling even more stress. In order to eddy out, you've really got 3 choices. And the first one is the one that I'm going to focus on, which is to take a break. So take a weekend or take your vacation or ask for a sabbatical, seek a medical leave or even a leave of absence. If those things aren't working for you and you're getting closer and closer to the edge of your own mental health capacity, and you can't take that short break, then sometimes you will simply have to step out of that role. This works as a volunteer as well. I know many people who are in volunteer positions who simply at some point have to resign those volunteer positions. I'm not encouraging that, but I want you to know that it is an option. And then, of course, in my case and many others, we get to a point where maybe we're not recognizing the extraordinary strain on us. Things happen, and we find ourselves thrown overboard, as it were. So let's say that you've had the opportunity to cut that eddy line, and you're now taking a little break. What can you expect? Well, for me at least, there was a sense of immediate relief. I was looking down the barrel of having to scrap a book project that I was working on because I was just so busy at work. When I was forced out of the organization and I realized, oh my God, I've got the whole summer I can just work on this book project. How great is that going to be? Summer in the high country. Oftentimes that's immediately replaced within a couple of weeks or maybe a month of some bitterness and resentment. And then there's the fear of missing out, FOMO. And this is the notion that you're sitting there in the eddy and your other friends are still out playing in the water and you're thinking, well, why aren't I out there playing with them? Gosh, they look like they're having so much fun. Sometimes disappointment will set in. And then the last phase of that, very much like the stages of loss and grief, is the acceptance and renewal phase. But here we're still in that backwater, still in that eddy. So maybe you've completed a perfect eddy turn, best one that's ever been done, or maybe you've been dumped overboard and you've been swimming for your life. It doesn't matter. You're in the eddy, you're safe now. First thing you've got to do is be kind to yourself. The second thing is take the opportunity to read the river. Dry yourself off, get out of your boat, stand on the shore, look downstream to see where it is that you want to go. You've got to ask yourself at this point, what stories am I telling myself and others about who I am and what I'm here to do? And of course, one of the most common stories is around the mythological journey or quest of the hero to fight the monster. Many of us, certainly I, see myself as that hero with the sword pitted against the monster of climate change or capitalism or poverty or whatever it is that we happen to be fighting on a particular day. And really what it comes down to is asking ourselves what mythology is defining who I am. And in the book, there's a chapter where I go into that mythology of the hero and the hero's shadow and try to parse out some of those challenges. Maybe most importantly, though, we need to ask ourselves, as the authors of an amazing book called Getting to Maybe do, and they say for those who start not from safety, but from rage, rebellion, and a deep sense of injustice, the need is often to find forgiveness, both for others and for ourselves. And so when you're in that quiet backwater, when you're taking a break from saving the world, it's not a holiday. You're not on vacation while you're there. What you're doing is the hard work to understand what put you in the boat in the first place, why you took on so much water, and why it is that you are now taking a break and contemplating the world downstream. And a big part of that is to understand your own motivations, why we do what we do. What is it fulfilling for us? What stories are we telling ourselves and others about who we are and the world that we live in? So some of the things that I read in the river while I was sitting there, first and foremost, I realized that I had to take responsibility for my own story. You've got to face it with brutal but loving honesty. And then I had to ask, what was in my own personal power to change? Where was I personally incompatible with the activism-driven life that I had chosen, and what could I do about it? Now, part of my life I spend as an organizational development consultant, so of course I started thinking about what are the structural changes that might cause-based organizations make in order to better serve their missions and mandates, and there's a whole chapter in the book about that as well. And then last but not least, I wanted to look at what are some of the styles and forms of leadership that are required in order to support people and organizations. Now, part 4, lesson number 4, how to eddy back in. So how do you know when you're ready? What did you learn while reading The River? How will things be different this time? And then who's going to help you navigate the big water? Remember that oftentimes when we're paddling, it's a team sport. And so knowing who's in your bow or who's in your stern is really important. So a few quick things to contemplate to how to eddy back in. Making sure that you take care of your mental health. Again, I'm a big proponent of meditation. I find that it provides me with a lot of clarity and helps me cut through a lot of the stories that are in my head about who I am and how I'm supposed to show up in the world. A good, healthy exercise regime, emotional health through immersion in nature, relationship health with an investment with friends and family, and of course, spiritual health, however we choose to define it. I'm going to wrap up here with another word about the time that we are in, to tie the COVID component of this evening to the piece about climate change. There has simply never been a time like this. The world has been through pandemics before, serious pandemics where, you know, millions of people have died. But it's never been combined with the kind of challenge that we face today. You know, the Spanish flu came on the heels of World War I, and that was an incredibly tragic time for the entire planet. Today, we're faced not just with you know, the physical armed conflicts around the world, but the threat of the extinction of many species and the great challenges that climate change presents on top of COVID. The uncertainty around these things, we don't know what's going to happen. I was telling a friend today, you know, we don't know whether or not there's going to be flooding in Canmore like there was in 2013. We don't know if this is going to be a bad forest fire season. We don't know if there's going to be a drought that's going to decimate our crop season here in Alberta this year, nor do we know when we're going to be released from our physical distancing. And that kind of uncertainty is very stressful. The one thing I do know is that that love and kindness and self-care are the most important acts of resilience that we can display. And so using these as a core to move forward, for me at least, is, for me, it's the most obvious form of resilience that I can put forward. So that's my short little bit. Thanks for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. Couple quick things before I turn the screen back over. I know that the bookshelf in Guelph is a fabulous bookseller who's doing home deliveries right now. I've heard that they're even delivering same day. And I do know that they've ordered some copies of Taking a Break. And if you wanted to support your local bookseller during this this time of economic uncertainty, I strongly encourage you to order a book through them. And then last but not least, if you want to get in touch with me, you just type my name into a web browser. You'll get taken to my webpage, and there's some pretty pictures there and information on books, and I'd love to hear from you. So that's that. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much. That was great. I really look forward to getting my own copy of your book, and really enjoyed the photography as well. Some also gut churning moments there. So I just wanted to bring up that we had a poll going, and I was hoping that I could just touch on that before we move on to open our chat here. So looks like we've had about 77% of our attendees have responded to this about your greatest fear going through the pandemic right now. So coming in at number 1 is losing one of your loved ones, especially the elderly ones. Our second highest ranked response is the economy impacted for long-term, resulting in losing your business. Then we've got our third, unsurprisingly, is getting infected with coronavirus. And then really a lot of people in attendance have selected all of the above. Strangely, only one person said they have no fear at all, and I think that might have been me, and I really don't mean that. So I think yeah, there's a lot going on for everyone right now. So I'd like to move on to introduce Rachel, who will be joining us for some additional dialogue. And if I could just get the windows to work in my favor here. I'm very good with computers, but not right now. Sorry about that. So let me introduce Rachel, please. Rachel is a mental health, Rachel Mahrer is a mental health therapist who works in private practice with teenagers, adults, and couples. She brings experience and interest in anxiety and mood disorders, trauma, relationship and family issues, sexual identity and general development, and lifespan issues. She's a registered social worker with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers and a member of the Ontario Association of Social Workers. So we're going to move on for a conversation between Rachel and Stefan, and I'll hop in occasionally, as will Evan. But at this point, I'd just like to reiterate, we really welcome your involvement in the conversation here. So please just hit that group chat and type away. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Rachel and Stefan to have a conversation.
Okay, and I'm just going to take like about 3 minutes to give sort of an overview on top of what Stefan's talked about coping. Made some really good points about exercise and sleep and meditation and being outside. And then in this specific situation, I would add, try and limit your access to news, because we can sit in panic all day long in this situation. Try and take some small moments of, relaxation or pleasure, because it doesn't have to be all managing anxiety or stress. We can have some moments of boredom or pleasure or connection with other people. That's critically important right now. I also think it's very important to lower your expectations around how you're managing things, because we're all doing things at home, like working and educating children, or I shouldn't say we are all, but many people are doing things at home that they never had to do before. And if you keep your expectations high, your stress level is going to rise along with that. I think it's important to know that human beings have a huge capacity to cope and to be resilient. And that's really good news. And we've seen examples of that already in the way people have given to others, which also makes us feel good by reaching out and connecting. And during times like this, which of course we've never seen this exact, situation before, but we know during times of war that people do have an immense capacity to cope and connect and help and do wonderful things. So that's important to keep in mind. I think people will notice that their emotions are shifting pretty rapidly. So you could feel one thing one moment, you could feel pleasure, you could feel boredom, you could feel overstimulated, you could be fearful, and all of those things can happen in a couple minutes or across a couple of hours. So try and be patient with yourself and with others, because we are in an extraordinary time. One of the principles that I use in my work is to really try and get people to amplify that idea of having a functional adult inside, and to notice another part of themselves that might be, that we call like an adaptive child or a wounded child, but to really have the functional adult be the part of you that's in charge right now, because it's important that we're able to cope and navigate through this situation. But also to have compassion for yourself, as I mentioned already, and for other people, because we can't be in our functional adults all the time. And something else that's important that therapists certainly will know about is that people in their past who have gone through some trauma, during this time, a lot of that memory or feeling will come back, and it might be confusing to them because they might not be able to identify that the feelings that they're experiencing on top of what everybody else is feeling are those feelings from the past. So that is a really important principle if someone can talk to someone, a therapist, or even recognize that themselves, to understand that maybe an aspect of what they're experiencing is from the past. And if you can kind of parcel that out or sort that out inside of yourself, you might be able to have some relief. And then lastly, as we start to move through this, we're not out of it. Of course, we're kind of in the middle of it, but as we start to move through it, a lot of people will start to ask questions of themselves and other people around shifts that they might want to make, or questions that they have about their relationship with the world or the environment or themselves or their work, kind of related to what you were talking about, Steph, around, you know, am I burning out, or do I want to change some things? And that's the good that can come out of something like this that's, you know, so anxiety inducing. So there can be a lot of post-traumatic growth that comes from a situation like this. Then we can start conversation now. I'm done.
Thanks, Rachel.
Rachel's very much considerably more succinct than I am.
But she didn't have those.
I don't have the. I didn't write the book.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's overrated. I find that what you were just saying, Rachel, really resonates for me, and in particular, the what you said about limiting your news intake.
Mm-hmm.
As a political organizer, I'm a news junkie. You know, I've long felt that if I'm not the first person to know about something, then I'm not doing my job as a political activist. And I have just had to stop watching and listening to the news. For a while, I was addicted to the Prime Minister's morning news conferences outside of his home. I'm not watching those anymore because it's really just kind of more of the same. And you know, I listen to the news when I get up in the morning, but then that's about it for the day. Because I figure, like, if something dramatic changes, somebody's gonna let me know.
Yes.
And it makes my day so much better. I'm almost able to think that we're living normal lives if I'm not tuned into CBC, you know, every hour on the hour to listen to the same news reports.
Yeah, that's really important. And even though things change so quickly right now, you're right. If something dramatic happens that we need to know, someone will let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can, you know, and to emphasize that, the last thing I ever want to do is listen to the news at night.
It really affects your sleep.
Oh, man, it just winds you up, and then you have bad dreams, or you're up all night. And you know, I used to think that checking my email was the worst thing I could do at night, but now I know that listening to the news is the worst thing I can do.
Yeah, it's true.
I feel a little like when 9/11 happened, I remember watching CNN and seeing, like, whatever you could actually still get on the internet at the time, because everything just, you know, shut down. But it was moment by moment, and just the feeling of just shock and overwhelm. You know, it just kept going all day long. But at a certain point, it was done, right? And now it's like weeks of what is the next thing that's going to be overwhelming and that we have to process and deal with. And you know, I know I'm usually a great sleeper, and it's not good right now.
No, it's not. And yet at the same time, I think most people have noticed an ability to cope from week to week. Like, I noticed such a big difference for myself and a lot of the people I work with in this week, which is week 5, compared to maybe last week and certainly the weeks before. So in the middle of this awful situation, there is an adjustment or an adaptation.
So we've just had a question in from Renee. I don't know if you've seen that, Rachel.
Just a minute, I'll see if I can see it.
Oh, here, I'll pass it on to you. So Rachel's wondering if you have any tips for connecting with people without talking at all about COVID. And is it rude to say that you don't want to talk about it?
No, I think that's a healthy boundary. If you're connecting with someone, you can say, I want to limit it, or it would be really great if we could not talk about it, or let's have a COVID-free discussion for an hour. I think, I think most people are up for that. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talk about that, and I think it's a healthy boundary.
Yeah, that's great advice. Really great advice, Rachel.
Mm-hmm. It was Renee's idea.
Yeah.
Please, anyone in attendance, if you do have any other questions that you'd like to bring forward. Judy just had a comment about just what I was speaking about the Twin Towers, and saying it felt like COVID was a bit different in that it came up stealthily, and there was a lot of denial and it took time to surface in various countries.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that keeps on hitting me hard is just how the denial is just so shocking, and I feel like it's very pertinent to our reaction to climate change, in that it's just so much easier to bury your head or just keep doing what you've been doing rather than facing this thing that is similar in the sense that it's amorphous until it's right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like we're not very much in control of its impact, and there are few things that we can do to mitigate it.
Well, I think one of the things that COVID-19, as well as climate change and many of these other challenges, illustrate for us is that we're actually not in control, period. And being able to understand and relinquish control sometimes is very freeing and empowering. One of the great challenges is, there's been many comparisons between how these two crises are impacting the world. I think that there's actually a bit of frustration around the fact that, within a matter of months, we've been able to essentially shut down global industry, the airline industry. Energy use in Europe has gone down by over 40% during this period of time. All these things that climate activists have been saying we need to do for the last 30 years, and society's been saying, no, we can't do those things. And then suddenly this pandemic is like, okay, we're going to do all of these things. Now, the corollary of that is that it's devastating our economy, and it's going to be hell trying to dig ourselves out of this hole. But one of these is a slow motion catastrophe, climate. One of them is happening in real time, COVID-19. And it's just really interesting to learn to be the observer in this situation and to see what causes the world to make these decisions and how we can understand and use those lessons for moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes that those things that shock us into action, I mean, for some people, they're empowering, right? We actually have those moments of seeing the terrible effects of climate change, and that just lights a fire under us to want to do more. Whereas I think a lot of people just get sort of overwhelmed, or that distancing of like, well, it's not happening to me. I don't have to worry about keeping 2 meters between me and somebody else right now because I'm not sick. I don't know anybody who is sick, so it's just I can just keep on going. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of getting out of our realm of dealing with the stress of it all, but how do we balance that bringing action without overwhelm?
That's always the question, isn't it? Yeah, because as Steph's talking about burnout with people working with climate, I can't help but make connections with counselors, because we talk about burnout all the time, and all the signs are the same as what he was mentioning. So there's always that tension between keeping the issue front and center and getting people involved, and not having people be complacent. So I think that's a good question, a good answer. And the answer is probably going to change from context to context. Yeah.
Michael, could I jump in here?
Please, Evan.
I'm trying to let the whole COVID situation give me jet fuel, personal jet fuel, not the stuff, not the fossil fuel that we're putting into airplanes, but I'm trying to use it. And I'm not saying I'm successful at it. I'm saying I'm trying to use it as jet fuel from the perspective that it's really quite profound what the world is doing right now to fight this pandemic. And the tiny bit of hope that this all gives me is that this is the kind of effort and the veracity that we need to use to attack climate change in a manner that really gets the results that we need as quickly as possible. So I'm truly hoping that it will awaken enough people that we can actually see some really serious, because frankly, in spite of all of our best efforts at this, we've been nipping away around the edges for years now. I'm rather than getting all down in the anxiety side, I'm trying to find the positive, trying to find that silver lining out of this whole thing, and hoping that we can use it as a way of moving forward. I'll mute myself again.
Thanks, Evan. So maybe this is an opportunity to invite our audience to weigh in on their own experience when it comes to what we're actually seeing in terms of behavior at scale. Does this motivate you when you're thinking about your impact on climate change? Or do you feel that you're just so overwhelmed in dealing with the pandemic and all of those immediate issues that climate change has drifted off for you as priorities? I feel personally I'm a little bit encouraged because I'm certainly not doing the things that I would normally do. I'm spending a lot of time outdoors with my kids, and I feel like those small acts, not going places, as much as I would like to be more around people socially, I still feel that that I'm not having as much of an impact as I might normally in my day to day, and so that gives me hope that maybe others are seeing that same thing and seeing that it's not that far for us to go to not drive as much, or to be consuming less. But maybe I'm kidding myself.
Well, I think a lot of times when people make changes, and this is shown in legislation like with same-sex marriage and so on, people change their mind when their behavior changes first. So they don't come on board like with a concept, there's a behavioral intervention first. And so it could be that out of this comes a lot of change from people who didn't intend to be part of any kind of a change movement.
Well, that would be welcome, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the there's a couple of interesting comments, Michael, on the chat. And Megan raises an interesting fear. Do you mind if I read her statement out loud? She says, "My biggest fear with the pandemic is that the government and society will be so eager to get back to, quote, business as usual, that the effort to transition to a net zero economy will get pushed to the back burner. I'm not quite sure how to deal with that feeling." Wow, what a that is such a there's a lot of anxiety in that statement, Megan. Rachel, I'm curious how you counsel people to deal with stuff like that, because I feel it too. I've been feeling simultaneously like incredibly anxious about the federal government stimulus package that's coming down for the energy sector. And I've been in touch with a lot of people in government and in industry in the last couple of weeks in my consulting work. And I just feel terrible anxiety that we're about to sink 15, 20, 25 billion dollars into the petrochemical industry in this province, in this country, which would essentially be throwing good money after bad. And I don't know what to do, how to manage that anxiety.
Well, it's a big question. So I guess what I try and help people do is recognize that we all carry inside of us multiple emotions or feelings. So it's not, you know, we don't just have anxiety, but we can have anxiety sitting next to hope, sitting next to apathy, sitting next to etc. And to try and recognize and acknowledge all of those aspects inside of us rather than just focus on the anxiety. And I think that's just such an important, because otherwise you are immobilized. But everybody's talking about some hope, some mobilization along with the fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And I think sometimes it's easy to, because some of those emotions are more dominant.
Mm-hmm.
I always consider, like, I always think that people talk about being angry and whatnot about these things. And I always think that underneath that is fear. Mm-hmm. And certainly Megan surfaces that really nicely in her comment about how fear drives so much of human behavior.
Yeah.
Fear of being without, fear of not being loved, fear of, of not being successful, fear of letting our families down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another really good comment from Chung Yin, Michael.
Yeah, I just saw that, Rachel. I think this will sort of fall into something you'll have some insight into, is the pandemic pause button actually helping some of us checking in with one another, asking questions like, what part of the old normal you still cherish and want to return to? So if you have any suggestion about how we can connect with more people and get more of us to think about how we want to live differently than the ways we have up to this point.
Well, that was actually one of the points that I forgot to read off when I was doing my presentation a couple minutes ago, is that is there any part of this that's happening right now that's okay? Because a lot of people talk about the fear or how awful it is, and it is, and I don't want to downplay that, or even some of the situations that are worse for some people. But there are some aspects of it that are okay or even good. The slowing down, the being with family if we are, because some people are on their own, but connecting, virtually with people. The not driving or not hurrying around or not, not having to do things in such a wound up way. And so, and making food and sleeping more, and those kinds of things. So I think that's really important to not lose sight of that there are some positive aspects to this forced being at home situation. People are reaching out more than ever before. And those are all the things that I think counselors want people to take note of. It not only helps us get through this, but it's an important and critical aspect of everything that we do with people, is to connect with other people. And so, I would just encourage people not to lose sight of that, and to ask themselves, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, what are some of the things that you want to see change as part of this stay-at-home situation that we have had forced on us? Is there anything about your relationship with others, yourself, your work, the environment that you want to shift?
Yeah. A bit of a contrast. There's Steve's, thanks, Steph, commenting to Steve here. And this is something I've been hearing from friends of mine who are entrepreneurs, who are saying, this is just such a difficult time to just navigate the stressors of just making things work. Mm-hmm. And how do we continue to find those reserves when will we be able to make those rent payments, or will we be able to support paying for staff? Can we keep people going? There's so much uncertainty. We've got in Ontario for sure another 28 days of very little happening. All this stuff is going to build up pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, my comment back to Steve was, I'm in similar position in that, after a year or more of trying to get back on my feet and slowly getting back on my feet, I started to rebuild my consulting business, which I'd kind of let go of for a number of years, and had a bunch of clients lined up, really exciting projects, like advising one of the super major oil and gas companies on transition to clean tech, and then literally get 4 weeks ago, like everything falls off the board. And fortunately, some of my not-for-profit clients have stayed on, and a couple of political clients. But boy, oh boy, I totally feel where you're at, Stephen. My message is, the work that you're hoping to do around energy retrofitting is going to be the backbone of our new economy. And, I have faith that the federal government will be smart enough to continue to make investments there. And so your job is to hold on through this period of insanity until you can come out the other side, and you will have something that the world desperately needs, and will need even more then to help us make this transition. I know it's easier said than done. You gotta mind the pennies during this period, but also use it. So many people I know right now are using this period of uncertainty as a period for reflection and planning and scheming about when the world gets back on track, how do we make sure that it doesn't go back to normal, but in fact that the new normal is in fact a phenomenal one that we can take pride in and reflects the values that we have as Canadians.
Steph, something you said earlier was relating to I think it was your 8 steps for keeping yourself. How did you put it? I don't want to say sane, but
no, don't say that. Rachel's the only one on the call that's qualified to say that.
So we try not to talk in those binary terms.
Good.
So you did talk about meditation as a component to how you keep an even keel, and I wonder, Rachel, if you have any thoughts on mindfulness, meditation, gratitude practices. What do you think of those in terms of helping us to get through this all?
Yeah, so every counselor would recommend anything related to mindfulness or meditation, or just sitting, in a calm state for a couple of minutes. And I should mention that we do have we will have, Evan, a link to a whole bunch of resources, including, some mindfulness links or websites, and then workbooks on COVID and anxiety and many, many more. There's lots out there, but yes, that would be absolutely highly recommended. Yeah.
Rachel provided us with a lot of those links, and we've updated the event page on our website. Okay. And what we'll also do with the subsequent newsletter that goes out, we'll once again provide those links to Rachel to make sure that people have them. Those were really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just say something on that, Michael?
Yeah, please.
So I'm a terrible meditator. I wrote a book called Running Towards Stillness a couple of years ago, which is about my twin passions for running and Buddhism. And in the beginning of the book, I talk about just how bad I am at both of them. I think that there's a lot of people who resist the idea of meditation or things like yoga or Tai Chi or walking meditation or mindfulness because they think that they're not going to be very good at it. Well, I'm here to say that after 15 years of sitting damn near every morning, I still suck. And that's completely okay. And it's certainly not something to limit. You shouldn't let that limit taking a leap. Sitting for 10 or 15 minutes a morning or in the evening, whatever is most comfortable for you, can have a tremendous benefit. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in your head, and for the first while, it can be incredibly challenging because in that moment of quiet, our emotions hate a vacuum. They rush to fill them, that vacuum of silence that we create. And so you'll have all of this stuff happening. And if you're anything like me, you'll start judging yourself very harshly during that period. And what I've learned over many years now is to not judge. it's the hardest thing to do, to not judge your own response to it. Like, I'm supposed to be like, you know, fulfilling some destiny around enlightenment right now, and all I can think about is my shopping list and how horrible I was to my grade 6 teacher. Oh my God. And as those things come up, you know, the purpose of meditation is not to create this sort of clear mind, but to really just become compassionate with yourself about your own thoughts, and to recognize that, oh, that's a thought. That's an interesting thought. Okay, I'm going to push that away now. I don't have to get attached to that thought. No, be clear for a couple more seconds. No, there's another thought. And then over time, very slowly, sometimes months, sometimes years, it just gets easier. The brain realizes that your brain realizes that you're not going to bite the hook, and so you start letting go of that sort of thing. But don't let the idea of perfection keep you from doing any of these things, whether it be, you know, walking meditation or Tai Chi or yoga or any of the other contemplative exercises that can help with mental health.
And there's so many different ways that you can, you can do these activities. So if one doesn't work, I mean, try them for a while, because it does take a long time to get used to the whole notion of sitting quietly. But if, you know, there's yoga, there's meditation, there's mindfulness, there's walking mindfulness, there's silent retreats, there's not silent retreats. So try them out, because it is really important to calm your body down, to sit quietly, to have some peace and quiet, and to get your brain, your mind used to being quiet in certain moments. It's really, really important. And after a while, it feels good. Like, it's nice to just do that too.
I always look forward to it. I think of it as a cool, refreshing stream being diverted through my heated thoughts and heart. And it cools me, and I always look forward to it, and I always feel better afterwards. Not always. Sometimes I come out of it thinking, oh God, that was just awful. But for the most part, it's being gentle with ourselves is part of the work of being human.
Yeah, that's well said. I agree. Yeah.
That analogy.
Yeah.
So we're getting on here in time, and I just wanted to just acknowledge a couple of comments here, just about some optimism I'm seeing from Jill and from Janet, that we are capable of creating some big behavioral change in this moment, and it's not all bad. I think that if we can step back a little from the anxiety and the worry, and to look for these things like the benefits of shifting businesses to telecommuting more, which is a really substantial way of reducing our demand for fossil fuels for all the commuting, and also the potential for getting larger players on board. I think that's an excellent point, that we're demonstrating some things are possible here. I mean, it's not a good scenario to do that, but it's possible. We've been able to achieve these things in a short time. Just a couple more comments in here. Another one from Chung Ying. So sweating it out, and and any thoughts about that?
Sweating it out?
Yeah.
Do you mean exercising?
Yeah, Chung Ying's talking about a vigorous exercise that allow people to sweat it out, can be really energizing and morale building. Do we have anything already organized for us activists to join in?
Mm-hmm.
I think Evan was suggesting he's going to lead some dance. Was it? You wanted to? Yeah, Evan's going to get his own TikTok channel going, and we'll all be.
And there's a comment there from, I think it's Mary Cameron. Can you read that one? Because I want to make sure that we respond to hers.
Sure. This will be our last question. So Mary's a high school student growing up with reality. She can access a world of information and minute-by-minute news at the touch of a button. In this way, I'll read directly. I find that I and many people my age have become highly desensitized to news altogether. It's not quite like personal burnout, but it can have similar impacts on motivation. The speed of turnover of news makes it hard to keep up. Any recommendations of how to keep young people motivated to pursue things long-term rather than attacking each obstacle as it hits? Yeah, that's a tough one.
Well, and Mary, thank you for making that comment and for just being here. I think that's really commendable. So, and I work with university students a lot. And so, you know, it's a hard time when you're young to see things like this happen and all the other things that have been happening in the world. So I think your question's a good one. I don't know if I can answer it, but what I would encourage people, you know, younger people to do is to talk to each other and raise this question with each other. Because I think, you know, older generations can try and engage you, but I think with each other, you're going to be more successful at answering that really good question that you're proposing. And I also know that people change as they grow older so that they can stay a little bit more focused and not pivot so quickly from, you know, your ability to stay on, to stay with something or to not shift away from it does change. And so people like you asking those questions can make that change, I think. But thank you very much for, even though I'm not answering it very well, I think the question is one that you should keep asking. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, do you mind if I take a crack at that, Michael?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
It's a great perspective,
yeah.
Rachel. And Mary, like Rachel, I'm so grateful that you're here. You know, I have two high school age sons, and I started my own conservation engagement when I was in high school and worked with a local high school group here to you know, just sort of mentor them a little bit. In particular, the last part of your statement really rings true. Any recommendations on how to keep young people motivated to pursue things long term, rather than tackling each obstacle as it hits. I wrote about this a lot in Carry Tag in the Mountain, because we, you know, when we're young in particular, we think, well, you know what, if I just throw myself at this for 5 years, and I'm going to have this issue licked. I've got this. And then 5 years comes and goes, and then 10 years, and you feel that overwhelming sense of disappointment that that despite all of your efforts, the challenges still exist. And the fact is that the challenges, whether it be climate change or biodiversity or homelessness or poverty or pandemics, will always exist, and they always have. And that's part of the reality of being alive on this planet, is that by its nature, human life is fraught with challenge. And and we need to be prepared for the long term. These efforts are not sprints. They're not relay races. These are like super marathons. And we're in it for life. And so figuring out how to do that, to do these things in a way that allows us to stay healthy and happy and fulfilled and live a life that achieves its full potential is one of the greatest gifts of being human, but also one of the greatest challenges. And it's interesting that the next question from Gareth is very much along those same lines about being overwhelmed with requests for volunteering and whatnot. You know, my message to both Gareth and to you, Mary, is set boundaries. Know what you're capable of. Take a staged approach. First, I'm going to do this, and if that works out and I can maybe do a little more, that's great. I run political campaigns. I get hired or volunteer to run election campaigns, and that's a microcosm of these situations. You know, political campaigns are famous for burning out their volunteers because it's all going to be over in a month. Well, that's not the scenario that we're in right now. It's going to take us 20 or 30 years to lick this climate change challenge, and even then, we're still going to be working on it in maintenance. And we need people like you, you know, all of you, to recognize that we're in this for the long haul. And if that means that you got to take a week off or a month off or a year off, then take it. Do what you need to do in order to sustain yourself, because you are no good to the causes that you serve if you burn yourself out, and nor can you live the life that you're here to fulfill if you do the same.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for responding. And people do it together, so one person isn't responsible for everything. So the team effort and stepping in and stepping out is really important.
Yeah, the Atlas complex, the world on our shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in the spirit of not burning out, I think that this is a pretty good place to draw it to a close.
Mm-hmm.
And with a lot of gratitude to you, Stefan, and you as well, Rachel, for helping us have this conversation. And to everyone who's attended and provided your comments, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. It's such an important time for us to come together. And I'd like to also express my own gratitude for not losing sight of this important thing that we've taken on, this fight against climate change, and for taking some time out of your evening to spend it with us. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Rasha, who has a couple of closing comments for us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rasha. I'm the Sustainability Program Coordinator. I work with Evan at Emerge. I would like to start with thanking everybody here for joining us in this webinar. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Rachel. It's been very wonderful tips and advice that we learned from you. I hope you guys, the rest of the participants, they do enjoy this webinar and found it very informative. One thing I would like to end is I want to play a video, so I hope that you will stay tuned and check it out for us. I will start with sharing my screen and then we can play it together. So just stay tuned. So I will do this. Go here. So this fits well with our dialogue, the discussion that we've been talking about. I will play it now, and I hope you will find it very interesting. Okay, can you see it? So that's Michael, our chair, if you noticed that. So I will.
That was great. Well done.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you. Shukran.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Rasha. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Evan.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Cheers. Good night.
Thanks so
Good night,
much.
everyone.
All. Thank
Bye.
you. Have a good night. Yeah.
Do you and your team need to work remotely? Open your free account at monday.com to bring your...
Yeah, so I will end the meeting now. Thank you, everybody. And I will stop the recording.